Okay, so in the previous video, we showed you how to set up a background and how to create animated objects, specifically objects with an animation component. Now I'm going to show you how to add a second animation. There's many reasons why you'd want a second animation, like say in a side scroller, maybe you want a jump animation, a climb animation, a fight animation, whatever. Well, same thing. In the RPG, they're going to have multiple animations as well. And this specifically is going to be for an attack animation. So let's start with our suit. I already dragged and dropped some new animation frames in from the external folder. And we're going to add a second animation. Now, when you originally click on the character and you click on the animation tab, you get a prompt saying you're about to create an animation. Well, an animation is already there, so you're not getting that prompt. So what do? You just come up here where it has the name of the current animation, and you just choose Create New Clip. And there's the list of all our animations. So now this is going to be an attack animation, and it's for the suit. So again, you can come up with whatever naming convention you want, but I encourage you to actually come up with a naming convention, something that's consistent. Otherwise, as your project gets bigger, you're not going to remember what these individual animations do. Now, if you're going to have multiple attacks, this probably isn't a great name, but again, this is meant to be a simple introduction to making an RPG. So, change this to 15. And then we take our frames, we put them up there, scroll a little bit. Now, the way this is going to work is the character, when you click on the attack button, the character is going to appear in front of the enemy and then go through the attack animation. Now, in this kind of animation, you may or may not want it to cycle back to the beginning. That might not look as dramatic as you want. You may want them just to do like the decisive strike and then return to their position in the rank, back to the left. So, to that end, we're going to do a different type of animation here. We're not going to cycle back through these. They're going to strike out, and then you're going to keep that last frame for just a few extra frames. So in other words, rather than having to do anything complex like pausing the animation or anything like that, you can kind of fake it just by using the same frame a few extra times. So let's take that frame and just drag and drop it up here. Again. Oops, I skipped a space. Again. You don't want it to be too much. It should be perceptible to the eye that there's a pause. But again, this is just the basic idea. And we'll just add one more. So this way you don't have to do any kind of, like I said, complex pausing of the animation or anything like that. You just fake it by adding a few frames. And then the animation will end. So whereas the other one goes out, and then it goes out, comes back to the beginning, goes out again, jumps to the beginning. This one goes out, and then it's going to stop. So that's going to be some of the coding that we're going to have to work on in a minute. So let's stop that. We'll go back to our scene. Now if we click on suit, you're going to notice something. Clip count 2. So now there's 2 clips there. I never really pointed this out in the last video. I figured we were going through enough other things. But you can see that there is a second clip associated with that object now. So what you can do is you now have to code for that. So how do we take a look at that? We need a new tab up here. So on Animator, if you click on Suit, here's a new screen we hadn't looked at yet. And that this, it looks like a mess to begin with, but we're going to demystify this. So basically what you have here is, this is really the start, when the animation starts. When the character is created, what should happen? This is saying go right into idle suit. So what you're going to do is you're going to have to set up a condition from idle suit to attack suit. What is going to make them go from this animation to this animation, and then likewise what's going to make them go from here back to here. So basically you're going to set up a trigger. So go to parameters, click on the plus sign, we're going to create a trigger, and we're going to call this We'll call this suit melee to avoid using the same phrase suit attack. And it makes it a little bit more clear that this will be a melee trigger as opposed to, say, a ranged attack. So suit melee. And we already said that's a trigger, so there's really not much more you have to do with it there. So watch what happens here now. So if you go to idle suit, you right click, make transition, and you go to attack suit. If you click on this, and you come over here, this is kind of messy to look at. Don't let it overwhelm you. We'll deal with it one thing at a time. But the main takeaway from here is that this, you're setting up a condition. So you said, okay, I want to go from this to this. Well, how do I do it? Here's the condition. You just created the condition over here. So plus, and there it is. You've added it. So there's a couple steps. You have to create the condition ahead of time, make the connection, the transition to be specific. And then when you click on the transition, you say, which condition do I want? Because you could add like 20 different conditions here. One could be based on time, could be another trigger. And now we're going to right click on this, make transition, and go back. So now you have it going from the idle suit to attack suit if this trigger occurs. And for the trigger to occur, it's just setting it to yes. We'll show you how to do that in a minute. And then it returns. This one will be based on time. So what's going to happen is just going to automatically go back. We'll get into a little bit more detail, but if you click on this here, you can see there's like an exit time and so forth. So not going to worry about too much of the details here. I'm just trying to set up the basic transitions and about how you can apply certain conditions such as triggers. Okay, so we're now saying that this is going to happen. This suit will go. This object will go from idle suit to attack suit and then back based on those conditions. So what do we have to do to make this work? We have to create a script. So we hadn't done it up to this point. You could just right click, choose create, and choose C# script. We'll call this suitcon, short for suit control. You could try creating a single script that controls all the playable characters, or you can create a script for each and every one of them. It's your choice. Pros and cons to both, really not worth getting into here since we only have 2 characters. So now, just like any other component, there's now a script. So, double click on that. So all I did was drag and drop the script onto the suit game object in the inspector. Okay, this is mono develop. It comes with Unity. For some computers, it may default to Visual Studio. The problem is you have to pay for Visual Studio, so you would just have to change that in the preferences. I believe it's... If I can't find it here, I'll see if I can find it in... I'll put it in the comments, but it's... Okay, it's Preferences, External Tools... And here we go, external script editor, mono develop. So it may default to Visual Studio and give you an error message saying you need to pay for it. Just change it here. Okay, so back to the script. What are we going to do in the script? We need to have that trigger be set to true. So here's how we do that. So we're going to use a very powerful statement called getComponent. GetComponent does exactly what it sounds like. As we mentioned, each section here is a component. The getComponent command lets you make changes from the script, which means you can make changes to all these different settings while the game is running. So as you can see, there's a start section, so that, as the name would suggest, is either the start of the It's either the start of the scene when it first loads, or it's when the object first instantiates, because some objects may not get instantiated when the scene starts. Say you hit the fire button, well, that's when that object gets instantiated, that bullet that you shoot. So the start section is really when the object instantiates. So it could be the start of the scene, or it could be partway through. The update is ongoing. It happens once per frame. So this script is currently attached to the suit. So if I say get component, I'm saying I want to get a component of the suit because the script is attached to the suit. All right, what component? Well, we want the animator component. Right there. Okay, well, what? Well, we're going to set trigger. And what is the trigger? It's going to be that exact name that we called it, which was suit melee. Then we're going to save this, and I'm going to double check that we don't get an error message and that that was really the proper spelling. Okay, so no error message down here. And let's go back to animator. And yes, suit melee. All right, well, we don't want it to work like this because this says that basically as soon as the update, as soon as the first frame occurs, we're going to trigger the melee. We don't want to do that. We want it to be based on a button click. So there's different ways to control games. If it's a PC game, you may have a mouse, you may have a gamepad. So for the time being, I'm going to set this up with the keyboard because it's easy. Don't worry if you want to see it with a game controller. I'll do an addendum at one point. What's important is the main functionality, the main learning how to make an RPG. Don't worry about whether we're using the keyboard or a gamepad. That's minutia. That it can be taken care of later. So, if input, and as it is, we're probably going to change the way the attack works because right now it's very preliminary. There are no turns. It's not the enemy turn or the player turn. You haven't even selected a player. So even this is going to change. So it's an iterative process where you make iterations, and that in this iteration, you're just going to hit a certain button and it's going to trigger the animation. So if input dot get key down, and it's going to be space. So if the space key is pressed, now surround this with the squiggly brackets because Unity loves its parentheses and its brackets. So if you press the space key, then it should trigger this. It's setting this trigger, and then that trigger triggers the animation. There you go. Now it's kind of slow, so we want that to change. But just like that, you've suddenly added player interaction. You've added functionality just like that. And that's what the development's going to be like, those little modifications. So now, let's go back into that animation. And let's go to attack. And we have that at 15 frames per second. Let's bump that up. Doesn't take a lot to make a difference. Let's bump that up to like 18. But consequently, we're going to have that last frame hang on a couple extra frames. So hero attack. Not much, just a little bit more to offset the difference. And that's it. And now you can see that you can modify an animation sequence once you've already created it. So a little bit more quick. Now, if you notice, she seems to shrink a little bit. Don't worry about that. That's not an error in the coding. It's an error in me because when I drew the attack animation, I had unwittingly changed the size of the I zoomed in ever so slightly, or zoomed out rather, so don't worry, that's not a glitch in the coding, that's a glitch in me. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to make sure that when a character is being drawn or an asset is being drawn, you set parameters. Now, that might seem to contradict what I said earlier when I was talking about making the background bigger, case by case basis. So the background, it's okay. With the player, not so much because you need that consistency. The good news is it really won't show. There's a couple things we can do. We can, as I said, change the pixels per unit on the animation. That would basically fix it. Not to mention that we're going to have the character appear here. So going from here to here, you probably wouldn't notice a size change. Okay, so one last thing for this video, and then we should be done. And that is, as I just said, they're going to jump forward and attack. So let's do that. So we already have the key check that you want to attack. Now we need to actually, we have the trigger of the animation. Now we want it to move in front of the character. So if you click on the enemy, they're at this position. So I was going to move it, but that's fine because the character's going to be in front of it anyways. And again, this is something that we're probably going to modify in a later video because right now there's only one enemy. As I said, there will be multiple enemies. So, get component, transform, position, and we want the suit to be positioned in front of the pumpkin monster. So the X needs to be less than this because from left to right, X increases. From bottom to top, Y increases. So for the character to be here, and in fact, really no reason for me to, I really can just show this rather than trying to explain it. So if you move the character here, you can see they're at 2.8. So, whereas they were over here, you can see -6. So, moving along the world X coordinate, it's positive left to right. So we want her to be at like 2.8 or so. And it looks like about -0.42. So, it's a vector 2 because we're in a 2D environment. Like I said, we're not doing anything with the z-axis. And we said it should be 2.8. Got to put in an F there because you're using a decimal. If you don't put in the letter F, it gets confused because you have a decimal, you have a period, and then a comma, and it doesn't know what to do. So 2.8 F, and I believe we said -0.42 for the Y. And I'm sorry, I said vector 2, and it did a vector 3. Okay. So now watch what happens. Hit space. She jumps there and attacks. Now that really shows that there's a pause, which we really didn't notice before. And this is easy to fix. So if you go to the suit and you go back to the animator, okay, and you click on the exit transition. So this is the transition from attack, we want the entry transition. So we want to go from suit to attack. It's that we really weren't going to do much with this. We're just going to set up the condition. Well, if we expand settings, and we'll get rid of has exit time. That should do it. Because that basically just overrides all that. So now it continues the cycle. You want to make sure you didn't break anything. There we go. So it goes right into it. And then we just need them to come back at the end of the animation sequence. However, that is a new bit of coding. So even though it's similar to what we're doing. I kind of want to put that into the next video. I don't want to go too far into that. So for now, you've seen how to transition from one animation to another, and we move the character, and then what we're going to do is we're going to have a timer that basically brings the character back, but you'll see how that works.